What practice had Israel neglected during the wilderness wandering, and why? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Joshua on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Joshua 5 verses 1 to 7, but before we do, let's read that passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Joshua chapter 5 verse 1, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Joshua 5, beginning at verse 1. So it was, when all the kings of the Amorites who were on the west side of the Jordan, and all the kings of the Canaanites who were by the sea, heard that the Lord had dried up the waters of the Jordan from before the children of Israel, until we had crossed over, that their heart melted, and there was no spirit in them any longer because of the children of Israel. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives for yourself, and circumcise the sons of Israel again the second time." So Joshua made flint knives for himself, and circumcised the sons of Israel at the hill of the foreskins. And this is the reason why Joshua circumcised them. All the people who came out of Egypt, who were males, all the men of war, had died in the wilderness on the way, after they had come out of Egypt. For all the people who came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness on the way as they came out of Egypt had not been circumcised. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people who were men of war who came out of Egypt were consumed, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord, to whom the Lord swore that he would not show them the land which the Lord had sworn to their fathers that he would give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then Joshua circumcised their sons, whom he raised up in their place, for they were uncircumcised, because they had not been circumcised on the way. We have now seen the children of Israel cross the Jordan River and are encamped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho, as our map shows. Here they stop for a short period of time, the reason of which will become evident in this as well as the next lesson. Why then during this stop did the armies of Jericho, and the Canaanites in general, not simply attack Israel and take them? Because word had gotten out of how Israel crossed the Jordan River on dry land by the word of the Lord, which caused these peoples to fear the Lord. And of course, this is the Lord's doing, just as he said on numerous occasions in our past studies. However, to these idolatrous nations, the reason for this fear is completely logical. After all, they worshipped gods that could not dry up rivers, or defeat large armies, or do any of the things that the true God of heaven could do. Even to them, in their idolatry, they understood this was different. And so if Israel's God could do this, what would he do to them? But why did God strike fear in their hearts at this point? Well, the first reason that we'll deal with today is that the men of Israel were going to be circumcised here. From Genesis 34, when the men of Shechem were circumcised, the procedure incapacitated these men for a few days, which is why Simeon and Levi were able to come in and destroy the city in vengeance for what the man Shechem had done in raping their sister Dinah. If God had commanded the men of Israel to be circumcised, but didn't strike fear into the hearts of the people of Canaan, Israel would have easily been defeated. Now verse 2 of chapter 5 confuses a lot of people, for here the Lord tells Joshua to make flint knives and circumcise the sons of Israel a second time. Physically speaking, such is impossible, for one is either circumcised or not. The skin doesn't grow back. So what could the Lord be saying here? Well, as is often the case with other hard-to-understand passages, the immediate context will help us determine what is meant. Verse 4 makes it clear that when Israel left Egypt, all the males had been circumcised, as this was a custom of Israel dating back to Abraham, and it was also a custom in other Mideastern nations, some of which also dates back to Abraham through Ishmael. However, all the people born in the wilderness, presumably meaning between Sinai and Jericho, had not been circumcised. Why? Well, we're not given the exact answer here, but there are two answers that seem plausible. The first reason had to do with the life Israel was living since Sinai, which was nomadic. We said in our study of Numbers that Israel likely remained near Kadesh for the entire period of time of the wilderness wandering, but that doesn't mean they stayed in the same place. Being nomadic in this way would make it difficult to practice circumcision For it not only requires someone to perform the circumcision, but it also causes the newborn some pain, which would make it difficult for the families of this child to travel. So it would have simply been a matter of convenience that the Lord allowed. The other possible reason could surround the spiritual condition of the people after they rejected the promised land the first time. So grievous was their sin that God caused an entire generation to die off in the wilderness. For that period of time, it could be thought that God's covenant with the children of Israel had been severed. No, he didn't utterly destroy them, but he did punish them. Not circumcising the males would therefore represent the temporary severing of this covenant. Whatever the case, when they crossed over the Jordan, the men of Israel needed to be circumcised in order to be in a covenant relationship with God, for the law said that whoever was not circumcised would be cut off from among the people. So that is what the people did, and that is what is meant when verse 2 says that Israel was circumcised a second time, that the generation that had not been circumcised, the second generation, were now circumcised. But there is another important reason that the men of Israel needed to be circumcised. That reason we'll cover in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Joshua chapter 5, verses 8 to 15, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.